I'm going to ask that we start on a positive note. There are a lot of lessons learned about New York 3. We thought we would go down the table and say just a couple words about what you think has been most groundbreaking and noteworthy about the agreement. Jessica?
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Nicole. So as Nicole said, HPD is the capital funder for the New York 3 units. As of today, we started 60% of all the units we were planning on doing, and as Matthew suggested this morning, in the next 25 days, we're supposed to do another 500 units, so that's why I don't have a manicure today, so apologize for that. We sometimes in government, we use the term aspirational goal to mean, please don't blame me if this doesn't work out the way we promised that it would. But I think in terms of New York 3, we've actually really knocked it out of the park in terms of our so-called aspirational goals. Some of you have heard me tell this story a million times, but it bears repeating. When we were originally planning for this New York 3 agreement, Tim, who's here today, was nice enough to let me tag along in some of the meetings, and we came up with a number of 6,000. So Tim and Eileen Popkin and a couple other people said, "What should we? When we go to that meeting with the state, what do we say? We say 6,000." So Sean Donovan, who I will blame for this forever and ever, said, "Okay, if you want 6, ask for 9, and then hopefully we'll get to 6." And we ended up at 9. So that was never. Forget about aspirational goal. This was like a crazy forget about it. We never planned on getting to 9.
And then he left town.
And then he left town, yes. And then he hightailed it out of town after having made us make those promises. So, 9 was something way outside the bounds of aspirational. And actually, Nicole calls us being 2 years behind, but I think from a capital development standpoint, by the end of the plan, we will have started construction on all the units that we promised to do, and then it'll take us about 18 months or 24 months after that to finish it. So it's really been quite a remarkable meeting our goals, which were not just aspirational, but really flat out crazy goals. There's also a slide in there about all the different agencies that work together, and I think given the 8 years in, we've had political administrative changes, we've had changes at the staff level, we've had the best economy in the past 50 years and the worst economy in the past 50 years, and even given all that time, we've really managed to stay remarkably focused on what the goal was, and we've never wavered or tried to tinker with the agreement in any way, and that's been pretty amazing to see with all the different parties that need to stay on track for something like this. Each of the agencies see the world in a very different way. We have different goals in our other parts of our job, and I think it's been really amazing that on New York 3, everybody's really stayed at the table and stayed focused on the goal, and we've really done a tremendous job getting there. So that's what's been the most amazing, remarkable thing about this agreement.
Thank you. Moira?
Well, I think Jessica just spoke for all of us, actually, and we can agree with everything, that Jessica just said. We have come a long way in providing housing to so many individuals, and the fact that we were able to come together and continue to be collaborative, even during the times that some are bad, some are good, some are ugly, but worked through all of the differences, worked through all of the issues that were problems, and continue to do so. There's always going to be things that we have to learn, adaptations that we have to make to our system, and problem solve on a much grander scale. I think that we're fortunate that we're able to work together in that collaborative nature. We go back to lessons learned. A lot of lessons have been learned, and we continue to learn that. We have a changing face in Medicaid and the whole system of care. Inception of health homes was not there when we started working within the New York programs. And what is the role of health homes going to be with the folks who are living in our program? So I think we have a long way to go with learning. I think it's very positive. There's a lot of pros that came out of this, and I look forward to finishing up this project and moving on to hopefully New York 4.
I think what's been quite remarkable is that, as Nicole mentioned, New York 3 added 8 new target populations to supportive housing development. And I'd say for the vast majority of those 8 new populations, we've demonstrated the efficacy of supportive housing, particularly for families, substance users, people living with AIDS, and as well as some of the youth population, though that's been a bit of a struggle. I think it's also quite remarkable in light of the tremendous financial crisis that this federal government, the states, and the cities have experienced, that New York 3 has survived intact. And I think that is a reflection of the commitment and collaboration that all of the city and state agencies have made, as well as the supportive housing community in general. So thank you for all your effort.
I think one of the crowning achievements of New York 3 is that it serves the various groups that it does serve. And 10 years ago, I was involved in trying to get a New York 3. And we were advocating for populations other than single individuals with a mental illness to be addressed. And what we had learned in the New York 1 and 2 is that supportive housing could have a much wider application. And so CUCS has used that, and that we do provide supportive housing for families and singles. And the great thing about supportive housing for families is its durability, is because it is permanent, and because we take families who are very troubled in many cases, and they're in the shelter system for a long time. Mayor Moira this morning talked about his situation when he was young and how his family lived in a car, and what his network did for him. And every family I meet in our supportive housing is an equally compelling story. And we don't have data on that yet because it's still anecdotal, but the anecdote would be children do better in school, families are generally stabilized. The families that we cater to are families with a mentally ill parent, and so these are families who might otherwise have been fractured and wound up in different systems if not for supportive housing. And then the second, I would say, is that in New York 3, we learned how to address chronicity and chronic homelessness. And that's evidenced in that the street outreach, the chronic homelessness among the street population is down dramatically. And that's in part because in supportive housing, we jumped into serving people with who were chronically homeless, chronically mentally ill, and that has now positioned us, I think, to serve people who have chronic medical conditions. The two things I would add, in the way of still being positive, but just wondering, is I hope that going forward, if there's another, New York housing development program, or whatever we would call it, is that we would not lose the spirit that we have captured in New York 3 to serve other categories of people. And that's connected to that we've learned how to work with people who have, who are chronically homeless and who have and now with chronic medical conditions, because there's a big focus in the state around serving people with, chronic conditions. And so, so the one thing, I think the important thing that we've learned is both of those, but that we don't lose either of them.